What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode. And I'm just going to kick this off by confessing something to you. It was bound to happen, but I came up with what I thought was an incredible video idea, one I've never made before, scripted the whole video, sat down to record it, and realized I made this video before. But actually, I just rewatched the original version of this video, and this one does have a different take because today I want to talk about those sneaky little signs of an unhealthy work environment and not just all the signs of an unhealthy work environment. I've been reflecting quite a bit about my own prior work environments recently, so that inspired making this video, and I really wanted to talk about those sneaky signs of an unhealthy work environment. You know, that sensation of like, well, I'm actually treated really nicely here, or, you know, I'm taken care of well, people are advocating, supporting me in different ways, but I just feel like something's not right. And I think when that happens, a lot of us can just assume that there's something going on that's within us, it's internal, our own, you know, stuff coming up. And that may be the case, but it's also definitely possible that at least in some cases that there's something going on within the dynamics of the workplace itself that are not so healthy, but they're kind of veiled in little signals of health. It looks healthy on paper, but there's something going on if you dig below the surface that make you realize that it's actually not so healthy, and that may be a reason explaining why you're feeling not right in your workplace. So it's not for me to say which of those could be happening to you if you relate with that experience, but let's talk about some of those sneaky signs of an unhealthy work environment, and you're free to evaluate yourself to see if any of them might apply to you, whether you're an employee working in that work environment or if you're an employer or somebody working in a higher level of management or something like that in the workplace, to see if some of these could be at play where you work. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think a lot of these are present in a lot of workplaces. So I'm going into this video with the awareness that a lot of what I'm saying, it's going to feel like, maybe isn't it kind of like that everywhere? And I'm hopeful that it's not like this everywhere, but it is probably present in a whole lot of places. So an awareness of how pervasive all of this likely is just going to be with us as I talk through these things. But I really hold strong that even if something is happening everywhere or in the majority of places, that doesn't make it right. So let's comment on it and see where things take us. And some of the things I'm going to name today will overlap with things I mentioned in that video I made a couple years back about signs of an unhealthy work environment, and some of them are not. So I'll also link to that video if you'd like to kind of expand your awareness of other signs of an unhealthy work environment. But these are going to be those sneaky little signs. One sign of an unhealthy work environment is that people in leadership act very differently when they're offering therapy or in all staff type meetings than they do interacting with you in private one-on-one. Now, obviously, we all act differently in different contexts. That's just totally appropriate human nature, right? Like the way that I act when I'm talking to my kids at home is going to be different than when I'm talking to my friends while we're out or while I'm sitting in my therapy chair talking to my clients. Like that's all appropriate. So what I'm referring to is actually when the character of your personhood is a different character that you present in one context compared to your true character, arguably, that we see in private. Now, there are so many different ways that this could manifest of kind of showing inconsistencies in how we present our character, but I'll give an example, like sitting in a staff meeting and seeing my boss interact with a colleague and the boss saying like, "That's a wonderful idea. Thank you so much, colleague, for presenting that idea. We'll take that into consideration." And then, you know, later I'm in private individual supervision as a trainee and the same boss says like, "Can you believe that so-and-so even offered that idea? What a stupid idea." Like that is like, what? Like that's not what you said when we were together. And that wouldn't be appropriate to say that out loud when we're together, but you created one narrative when we were all together, but clearly you're disclosing to me a completely different narrative now. So there's an inconsistency in how you're presenting your character, your approach, even your beliefs, opinions. That's definitely a sign of an unhealthy work environment. Another little sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment that I've definitely witnessed more than once now in prior work environments is when somebody in a position of authority in the workplace believes that there's only one effective type of therapy and enforces that upon everybody who works there. Let me clarify something, because there are workplaces that specifically offer a type of therapy, like, nearby there's the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Center of San Diego. I forget what it's called, but clearly that center is offering DBT. So if I were to show up and be an employee there and say, like, you can't tell me to be a DBT therapist here, like, that doesn't make sense. But I have seen it happen where, like, a new boss shows up in an existing workplace and says, this specific therapy is the only evidence-based treatment for all disorders across all contexts and demographics. And so if you are offering any other type of therapy, you are being unethical. That's just not true. It seems like such a random thing to put on this list, but the fact that I've only worked in a few places and I've seen this happen twice, it just seemed worth mentioning. Like, we know that there are lots of different effective therapies based on the evidence out there. Also, the things that are most evidence-based for one presenting issue might look different than what's most evidence-based for a different presenting issue or demographic. And of course, there's a mountain of evidence showing that, like, the most important thing predicting a positive outcome for clients is the relationship between the therapist and client. And yes, we also should be using evidence-based therapies in addition to that, but there's not just one evidence-based therapy for every single presenting issue. And when I hear that, it's like that person should not have the power to make everybody else use the same type of therapy, in my opinion. Another sneaky sign of unhealth in a workplace is that your complaint is framed as your problem. So whether your complaint is related to burnout or, maybe you're not burnt out yet, but there's too much on your plate, you're feeling overworked and exhausted, or some other complaint. So there's maybe a problematic coworker or manager that is inappropriate or unprofessional in some way, and you're complaining about it to the appropriate place. If it's somehow framed as, like, you're too sensitive, or you can't keep up, or, everyone else doesn't seem to have a problem with this thing that you're having a problem with, or, so-and-so, they're keeping up and they're not burnt out. So it comes back to you as your problem, then that's a sign of an unhealthy work environment. And often these things can be framed in such supportive sounding language, like, thank you so much for coming forward and sharing your concerns. I see that this is really affecting you and you're a valued employee of our company. We want to help you feel supported, and I see that you're needing some support. So, have you considered maybe seeing your own personal therapist? Have you considered reaching out to, peer support so-and-so, or, coaching or something like that, when maybe the thing that you're complaining about isn't related to the kinds of solutions that they're offering. So, like, maybe getting personal therapy, reaching out to peer so-and-so or whatever it might be good also, but this is a great opportunity for them to say, can you please tell us more about this thing that you're coming forward with or complaining about? That is a concerning thing that you're naming. What feedback do you have for us? What is going on within our system that might be contributing? And if somehow it's just kind of a matter of, like, how do we help you keep up with this unsustainable workload? Or, there must be something going on with you because you're the only person who's complained about this. That's where the unhealth is coming in. I haven't looked into the evidence on this. I don't know if this is researched already and either it's known or debunked or what. So this is pure anecdotal opinion from me. But an opinion I've been developing recently about this is that often whoever is kind of most sensitive in the workplace naturally is going to be the first person to complain about something, typically. And so because the most sensitive person is the first one complaining, whoever's hearing the complaint might see like, oh, I'm usually that sensitive person. So they might say like, oh, Marie, she's really sensitive. So of course she's complaining. You know, maybe if Marie gets a little support, then it won't be so bad. But in reality, those of us who are more sensitive, a lot of times we just have stronger sensors than others. And so we're catching a whiff of whatever stinky thing is going on a little bit sooner than most people are. And so, yes, we are the only one, or maybe one of two people or something, complaining about something that everyone else might say like, oh yeah, it doesn't bother me. I think it's fine. I think they meant well, whatever it is. They seem fine. But if you give it enough time without changing course, more people are going to catch a whiff of the stinky thing, and then everyone will be complaining. So I'm just naming that as like Marie's pure opinion. It's not research on anything, but not even opinion. It's just like a hunch, a wondering, a musing. Marie is musing about this. Could this be possible? And I think at least sometimes it must be true, even if it's not true all the time or even most of the time. So Marie's thoughts. Marie's thoughts. I feel like there should be like a disclaimer, like a song. I should get a jingle for that. Like Marie's unfiltered thoughts, Marie's unresearched thoughts. I don't know. Whatever. If you have a song idea, let me know. And another sign of an unhealthy work environment, this one doesn't feel quite as sneaky per se, but it's when people in positions of leadership and authority talk bad about clients behind their back or use otherizing language. Or it might be somebody who's not in leadership talking bad about a client in front of a group, and those in positions of management, authority, etc., don't gently correct that way of speaking about our clients. And I want to clarify something, because I definitely think venting for the sake of receiving support from your colleagues definitely has its place. But there's a difference between talking bad for the sake of kind of otherizing and villainizing a person versus honestly sharing the difficulty you're experiencing with a client for the sake of saying like, hey, I could use some support. I need some help. This is hard for me. Back in the day when I worked in workplaces, I definitely saw therapists talk bad about clients. I am totally guilty of it. In those days, I just slid right into it, right? It's like one moment you're doing group therapy and thank you for sharing and da-da-da-da, and then the clients shuffle out of the room and it's just you and your co-therapist and it's like, can you believe so-and-so? What a jerk, you know? And that's not helpful. But even if you're feeling that way, maybe it might be like, I'm having a hard time because when so-and-so said that thing, I noticed I had a big reaction. I'm wondering what that might be. Did you feel that way too? And that's just a very different kind of conversation, because now we're talking about this hard thing that happened with our client that affected us somehow. I think a lot of times when we're talking bad about a client, that may be ultimately what we're needing and we just misdirected how we spoke about it. But when we see that coming from folks in management and a position of authority, then it's setting a tone for that work environment, and it creates a space where everybody might start talking like that about our clients, and that is really unhealthy and harmful. Another sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment is when the ends are used to justify the means. Or another way of phrasing it is, when harmful structures are justified by pointing to positive outcomes or, something that aligns with the company's values. So an example of that would be, if let's say you're feeling totally overworked and you have 38 clients on your weekly caseload and a ton of admin, and somebody in a position of authority responds by saying like, hey, look, I know that you are working so hard and you're seeing so many clients, but just think now we're able to help so many more clients who need our help because we've upped our productivity requirements or whatever it might be. And it might even go on, and we're so thankful for all this work that you're doing because it's amazing. Here's some stats about how we've helped people and you've participated in making that happen. Like a lot of these sneaky signs of an unhealthy work environment come, and it's like, I think of that phrase like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like it sounds good when the feedback or information is getting delivered, but when you parse it apart, it actually has a very manipulative quality. Like, it'd almost be more helpful if it was just a wolf in wolf's clothing and be like, oh, I see what you're doing there. But it makes it a lot more disorienting and confusing for us when somebody is using such kind and supportive sounding phrasing to tell us something that's unhealthy. And I know there's going to be some of you listening who heard that example I gave of like seeing too many clients and how it could be helpful. And I know so many of us therapists have internalized that kind of mindset, like it's better to help more people, even if we're tired and overworked, etc. But I like to think of it as like, we can get away with that to an extent, but there is a line, and maybe there isn't a formalized number of where that line is, but we definitely are crossing it in our workplaces all the time. It kind of feels similar to me if like we were to say like, oh, it's really great if you can adopt a pet. Like there are so many pets out there without a home, and if everyone could adopt a pet, like who has the capacity to, that would be amazing. And if you adopt a pet, great, that's awesome. And maybe you might be able to stretch it and adopt 2 or 3, and that might still be fine even if you were hoping to only adopt 1. But if, let's say, you're expected to now adopt 40 cats, and somebody said like, but look, I know you're so exhausted taking care of 40 cats and your house is a mess, but look how many cats you rescued. It's like, okay, we crossed a line at some point, and I don't know if it was at 2 cats or 5 cats or when it was, but no, that perspective no longer works because now you're harming the therapist who has to carry the burden of being so overworked in this example. And you're also harming your clients. Like in that home of 40 cats, like that's when the Humane Society comes and rescues the cats because it's not good for them either. So when we're overworking our therapists for the sake of benefiting others, not only are we harming the therapist, but at some point we cross a line and we start to deliver poor client care as well. My 2 cents. I had trouble finding the right word for the next sign of an unhealthy workplace, and I think it's because there's an actual proper term for this and I'm just not privy to it. So the term I chose for this next sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment is defeatism. So please tell me in the comments if you know what word I'm actually looking for when I talk about this, but I'm referring to that dynamic that I hear so much, not just in the workplace, but amongst therapists and just everywhere, is this idea of like, if there's something difficult happening, that the response to it is like, well, yeah, that's just kind of the way it is. Or, you know, it's like that everywhere pretty much. And I see comments like this in my videos as well. Like people saying things like, well, yeah, if you want to be in the mental health profession, you kind of have to be okay with it being that way. That way being, you know, we're not making much pay, we're overworked, the job is thankless. We fill in the blank, that there's this really defeatist attitude towards the profession. And of course, if you hold that perspective within yourself, you are fully welcome to hold that perspective. But when someone in a position of power in your workplace offers that as a response to you coming forward with, whether it's a complaint or, you know, frustration or whatever it might be, if you're saying like, hey, I'm feeling overworked, or I'm feeling underpaid, or, you know, I'm not getting along with someone, whatever it is, if your boss then says like, well, that's just kind of the way it is, though, it's like that everywhere. Or if you want to be a therapist, that's how it is in the therapy profession. I'm sorry. That's harmful. Even if somehow it were true, which it's not, by the way, in my opinion, even if it were true, that response is unhealthy, right? To say, even if it's true, okay, yeah, I hate that this is so common in our profession, but I would like to be on the cutting edge of trying to do it differently, whatever is within our reasonable power. Or even if it is absolutely like that everywhere and there's nothing we can do, this person's negative experience related to it is still valid, because if it's happening everywhere, it's equally harmful. It's kind of this idea of like, if something is happening everywhere or in the majority of places, people can seem to use that as like an excuse to morally justify something, like, well, then it's not wrong anymore because it happens everywhere. But something that's wrong happening everywhere is just as wrong as if it's only happening in a few places. Does that even make sense? Like if somebody hit me Okay. And then I go to somebody in a position of authority and say, like, so-and-so hit me. If they responded by saying, yeah, everyone hits people though, so there's nothing I can do about that. I mean, first of all, it's inaccurate. But even if somehow it was accurate, like, this response is so unhelpful because it makes it sound like now it's my problem for complaining about this thing that just happens everywhere when it's not okay to hit people, even if it is happening everywhere. Like, we would hope that an organization or a manager or boss would take the moment to say, like, I wonder why my valued employee is bringing this up with me. This must feel important to them, and so I need to treat it as important, even if we hold the belief that it's kind of the same everywhere else. As I'm about to share the next sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment, I'm realizing I probably could have scripted this in a better order because this one's going to harken back to something I mentioned a few bullet points back. But another sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment is folks using otherizing language to refer to the populations served. Otherizing language can come in many forms. Like, it could be even using phrases such as, like, those people, that already communicates something. There's an us versus them. I'm not those people. Those people over there who are not like me has this very otherizing impact. But it also could be like our diagnostic language. And it's interesting to me how diagnoses that are still stigmatized still have identifiers that go with them. And though all mental health issues have a level of stigma to them, the lesser stigmatized diagnoses don't have these identifier terms. So, for example, we might still use terms like schizophrenic or narcissist, but I have never heard somebody say something like, I don't know, depressionist or anxietic. Right? It's a person with depression, or that person has a diagnosis of depression. There isn't like a term like alcoholic that has an identifier component to it. Now, I know just saying that there's going to be people who react to me saying that, kind of defending why we should have an identifier term. But I do think if you're in a position of authority in a workplace, it is important to make a move towards more inclusive language. A diagnosis is a descriptor, an aspect of a person's experience, not an identifier coloring all of a person's experience, in my opinion. Okay, the next sneaky sign of an unhealthy workplace, like, it's a doozy. I feel like we need to talk about this in general. And that sneaky sign is hollow concessions instead of sincere apologies. It seems to me culturally that overall we're progressing in the sense that a workplace, a manager, or whatever is more expected to apologize and held to that expectation more than it used to be even a couple of decades ago. So it seems that in unhealthy work contexts, there's generally enough awareness of that like when somebody's caught doing something they shouldn't be, an apology is necessary. And culturally, we're pretty stuck on this idea, I think, that if somebody includes the word sorry or I apologize or the company apologizes, that equals an apology. Almost like the word itself is the apology. So I strongly advocate and hope that in general, as a society, not just at work, that we can start to grasp better that an apology is far more than whether we inserted certain vocabulary terms into our apologetic statement. I also would like to advocate for the idea that sincerity of an apology happens on a spectrum. There's like actual denial, like I have nothing to apologize for, but it starts to inch up from there. You know, we all are familiar with the like, I'm sorry if I offended you, or even worse, like, I'm sorry that you feel offended. There's like no ownership at all. That's just, you're the problem still. So there's not much apology in there, but the word sorry is inserted. And then you can kind of go up from there. Like, I'm sorry because I realize I made mistakes. that is better than I'm sorry that you feel offended, because you're acknowledging you did something, but maybe you're not being specific, and maybe you're also not addressing, what specific changes you're going to make going forward. Like in that vein, you might say something like, I'm going to work hard to do better next time. I'm going to try my best to do it differently next time. But at the level of like the best version of apology that one could make in the healthiest way is to say, I realize these specific ways are the areas that I messed up. Here are the ways that I'm observing so far that making those choices has caused specific damage or harm. This is why it's not good that I did those things. And going forward, here are the specific changes I'm going to make so that I minimize or avoid making that mistake again. And whatever those specific changes are, they need to be something that can be held accountable or measurable in some way so that somebody could circle back and say, hey, you said you were going to do X, Y, Z, and I haven't observed you make those changes, right? That is a genuine apology. Did I just get on a high horse for a hot minute about apologies? Yes, but I see this all the time. I see it with couples and friendships, at work, everywhere. And again, this dynamic happens where you receive a hollow concession where, the vocabulary term of sorry or I apologize appeared in a statement from the workplace. And as the recipient, you feel like, okay, I guess they apologized, but I still don't feel good. So am I just holding a grudge? Am I bitter? Is this my problem? Because they apologized. They said sorry. So if I'm still upset, that's my problem. And again, that may be true, but it is worth naming that the apology may not have actually been an apology. So hollow concessions where there are non-specific apologies when an apology is called for is definitely a sign of an unhealthy work environment. Thanks for hanging with me on that one. I haven't heard many therapists talk about that too often, and it's such a pervasive problem that our apologies are not really apologies so often. So I just want to get that one on the map, I guess, in general. Okay, and since I spent so long on that, let's just rattle off the last couple signs that I have for today. One sneaky sign of an unhealthy work environment is gossip, especially from the top down. If you have a supervisor, manager, boss who is gossiping about whether it's somebody at your peer level or somebody in a higher position of authority, it's just not helpful. And gossip to me is when you speak about someone for the sake of disparaging them, again, rather than maybe seeking support. But when it's a boss, they shouldn't be seeking support from an employee. There's other formats where they should be seeking that support from. Another sign of an unhealthy work environment is that there's a lack of clinician support, just not enough support. People are too busy, whatever it is. Maybe it's a very genuine reason why a clinician's not getting enough support, whether the support is supervision, training, just any kind of support that you might need. It's just not there. That's a sign of an unhealthy work environment. That one, I hear that so much from clinicians. And it's so easy to say like, oh, my boss means well. And your boss does mean well, most likely, I hope. But they're too busy or, whatever it might be. And it may not be the boss's fault, but it's still an unhealthy dynamic within the workplace. Now, it doesn't feel right to do this episode without acknowledging, again, that the mental health system as a whole is unhealthy. Like the whole thing is riddled with all kinds of unhealth because, there's not enough support for the mental health care system. So that unhealth is inevitably going to trickle down. There are good people working in that system where that good person is doing everything they can within their reasonable power to do a good job and stay healthy. Nonetheless, the system might remain unhealthy and they don't have the power to change the whole system. So I need to acknowledge that because maybe even an entire organization truly, genuinely is doing the best that they can to stay as healthy as possible. And it may just be near impossible Now, there's certain things that we have the power not to do no matter where we are. We don't need to disparage other people. We can own our apologies. We don't need to gossip, right? So there's things that no matter where you work, no matter the state of our mental health care system, just shouldn't happen, in my opinion. And there's some things that are much more difficult to change, like productivity quotas sometimes. And I want you to feel empowered to know that just because maybe your boss or whomever means well, there may still be unhealth, and it may not be their fault, but that doesn't minimize at all the fact that you might be working in an unhealthy work environment, and you should be empowered to be able to see that clearly and make whatever decisions you would like to choose, rather than feeling like you're the problem, or even that, unhealth is just absolutely everywhere and there's nothing you can do about it. There are things you can do if you choose, or even if you're choosing to stay where you are, there are reasons for doing that you can still see it for what it is. Like, here's the parts that are me, and yeah, my work environment is not perfect, and I can see it for what it is. That's still a healthy move on your part to be able to see that clearly and identify it. Now, even though we don't have that much power to change the entire mental health system, my hope is that in time, workplaces can at least be more self-aware of how much they might be a cog in the greater system, and still have a compassionate take on how that truth may be negatively impacting their employees, and to acknowledge it for what it is, and not just say, it's like this everywhere, deal with it, right? But to say, this is hard. We are dealing with something harmful. How do we do this as best as we can within the perimeters that we're working within? And just acknowledge reality for what it is. Can we at least do that? That would be great. I mentioned that I didn't realize until sitting down that I made a video about unhealthy work environments before, and I didn't see this comment until I just went back now and scrolled through the comments from that video, but somebody said that it would be really helpful to talk about how to respond to management if and when that happens. So if that's a video topic that you're curious about, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'm happy to dive into that in another video, but I think this was enough for today's episode. Well, thank you for hanging with me. I have a feeling the podcast version of this episode is quite long, so if you made it here, thank you. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast. It's just like I'm just kind of slapping it together in a way. So I appreciate all of you who are listening. It's lovely. Well, thank you for watching this video. If somehow some of these signs of an unhealthy work environment are happening in your workplace, I hope this was useful to you to hear, and at least just be equipped with the knowledge so that you can decide what you want to do with it. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.